Sitting down with Rob Rains. How you doing, man? How you doing through all this?
I'm great. Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
For
It's
a
kind of
guy,
weird because my wife and I normally work from home, so the working part of this hasn't really been a whole lot different for us, except for the fact that we can't go to the ballpark and can't go to some of the places that we normally would be going to. But as far as actually staying home and working, that part of it has not really been all that different.
for a guy who primarily follows baseball, you're a pretty busy guy with no baseball.
Well, we tried. It's interesting because there's still people out there with stories to tell. We've tried to start up a little video chat with some quiz programs, just to have some content on the STL Sports Page website. But I miss baseball. I miss going to the ballpark. I miss talking to people. I miss writing really fun stories. And hopefully we'll get back to be able to do that here one of these days.
I've been to STLSportsPage.com. For those who have not, how long has it been in existence? And that's a busy page. You got a lot of stuff going on
Yeah.
that page.
We started about 8 years ago. It actually started as a way that my son BJ and I were doing a radio show on the 1380 when it was an all sports radio station, and we're doing a show every day for a couple hours. And so we actually started the website basically as a way to promote the show, a way that we could archive some of the interviews that we did and things like that. And then when the radio station changed formats, we had some advertisers that were with us on both the radio show, and then we also were putting their ads up on the website. And we basically went to the advertisers and said, hey, if we just did this strictly as a website, would you be interested? And they said, sure. So every one of the advertisers that we had 8 years ago when we were doing the radio show stuck with us, and they're still with us today as we kind of just transition into making it a full-blown website with no other vehicle attached to it like a radio show.
And you started your own podcast in the COVID era.
Yeah, I did some spring training and a few things like that, but really not as many as a lot of other places do. But it's another kind of way the business has changed as far as not just writing stories and traditional newspaper kind of style of reporting and writing. Now you have to do a little bit of everything: video, audio, web, all kinds of stuff. So it's been a learning experience for sure for an old guy that grew up in the dinosaur age of just writing for a newspaper and not having anything else to worry about.
It looks like most of the episodes you're on with your wife.
The quiz programs, yeah, we've been doing together. We actually met at the ballpark at Busch Stadium when she was reporting for Camel X, 30-something years ago, and I was working for the wire service, United Press International. That's how we met, and kind of just been involved in sports ever since. So, yeah, she helps me out every day on the website. She does a lot of the technical behind-the-scenes stuff about posting some of the other stories, some of the other interviews and features and things that we have up there. But, yeah, we've been doing the quiz programs together here for now over a month. I think when we started, we didn't really know how long it would last, and unfortunately, it looks like we're still going to have to keep going for a while. I'm out of questions. I need to come up with some new categories for some new questions here as we keep going with that program.
How did you propose to Sally?
Well, I actually, she thought I was asking her to go to Ted Drew's. It's kind of a funny story. So it kind of said, wait a minute, no, I'm asking you to get married. And she said, okay. So, yeah, it was kind of like a funny story way back in the day.
How does one confuse?
Something effective. Let's just go do it or something.
How does one confuse, will you marry me with, would you like more hot fudge?
Because I think we have been talking about going to Ted Drew's that night after, going somewhere else first. And I said, something about why don't we just do it? And she said, okay, let's go. And I said, wait a minute, what do you think I'm asking you? She said, we're going to go to Ted Drew's. And I said, no, I was asking if you wanted to marry me. So either way, she said, I think we did go to Ted Drew's afterwards. I know we went there. It was actually funny. We got married in February, and at the time, Ted Drew's was not open at that time of year. So we'd actually gone there a month or two in advance and had frozen a bunch of Ted Drew's and kept it in the freezer. So the wedding party in between the church and the reception, we drove over to the Ted Drew's parking lot and have a picture of all of us standing outside and eating our Ted Drew's ice cream in the empty store parking lot before we went over to the reception.
What is Rainbow for Kids?
That's a charity that we started about 20 years ago. Our niece had a brain tumor, and Sally was her godmother, and so we started the charity of giving kids parties, basically at Cardinal Glennon Hospitals where it all started, and then kind of just mushroomed into a much more of activities and things that we do. We actually just had an event for social distancing event with our kids for a little parade with the Mickey Mouse character and an ice cream truck, and so the police cars from Afton and St. Louis County and a fire truck came by, and we had the kids all got to have their pictures taken and things like that here. So it's just something fun for kids to do. It's an all volunteer organization, and it's just been, giving up parties and activities. Normally we take the kids to a ball game at Busch Stadium during the year. Normally take them out to different events at the Muni and have mom's days with activities where the moms can get away and not have to worry about the kids. So it's all designed for children with cancer and other serious illnesses. And it's been real heartwarming to do all that over the years.
And to borrow from your wife, choose happy.
Yeah, that's her new little thing. She did a book for long before we knew about anything about coronavirus. She did a book that came out this year called "Choose Happy: How to Find Contentment in Any Situation," and it's now she's doing a Choose Happy blog once a week on the website as well. It's just kind of a way to look at things from a positive point of view. But yeah, the book was really interesting and really powerful, I think, message about how you can choose how you want to live your life. You can either choose to be negative or you can choose to be positive, and I think it's obviously very appropriate in the situation that we're in right now. But I think it's just always a reminder that it's up to you. You may have things that don't go your way. You may have financial difficulties. You may have health struggles, but you still have a opportunity to find the good in people and to find the good in any situation. And so it's just a constant reminder about that.
You grew up in Springfield, Missouri.
I did. Born in Omaha, Nebraska, but moved to Springfield when I was just a young boy, about 5 years old, and lived there as a Cardinal baseball fan primarily, but all sports, obviously, and realized at an early age, I tell people that I always loved sports and loving being around sports, but I knew I had zero chance to become an athlete, so I tried to find some other alternative, and sports writing turned out to be the key. I was lucky enough to make some of the Springfield newspaper, and they let me hang out there during my high school years and answer the phones and junior high football scores and bowling agate, so things like that. So it was a real, kind of got my feet wet in the business at an early age.
The Prairie News.
That was the high school paper. Yeah, it was actually Kickapoo High School opened when I was a sophomore, and we were a new school, so we had a lot of new things about it. And I was lucky enough to be involved in the paper from the beginning, as far as being the sports editor and then the editor, and kind of knew that's as I say at that point, really knew that's kind of where I wanted my direction and my career to go.
So you and Brad Pitt, the two most popular Kickapoo Chiefs.
Yeah, it's funny. My mom was actually the librarian at Kickapoo. She used to joke people later that she thought Brad Pitt still had an overdue library book that he never returned. But he lived about 3 streets over from where I grew up, but obviously was a younger than me. I believe he had an older brother that was closer to my age, but didn't know him or hang around in the same. So we kind of were from the same neighborhood and the same school.
And what'd your mom and dad do?
My mom was the librarian at high school. My father actually passed away when I was a young boy. He was sold life insurance, but unfortunately had a heart attack and passed away when I was just a real young boy. So my mom was a single mother, raised me and my older brother, and did a great job. She unfortunately just passed away here a couple months ago. So
96 though.
Yeah, she had a great run, and we had a lot of fun together. So
what'd your older brother do?
He actually is, I joke and call him a rocket scientist, but he actually works in the space program in Houston. He was involved with NASA for a long time, and now he's working for one of the private independent contractors that works and supports all the NASA programs. We're totally different people.
Well, I mean, usually what's interesting about single moms is since there isn't a father the sons are trying to emulate, they end up, for the most part, being really different individuals. It's been my experience.
Yeah, I never really researched it. I mean, she was very supportive of both of us and encouraged us to do whatever we wanted to do. And, he liked sports, but never was really into that kind of area. He was more of a scientific kind of guy. Actually got a degree. His college degree was in geology. And, then went on to work for an oil company and then ended up getting the job at NASA. So, yeah, it's just more of that background was more of his thing than mine.
I've been through Springfield a couple times. Do they still have that original Steak and Shake? The old black and white with the.
Oh yeah, there's a lot of good fun stuff still in Springfield. Yeah, don't get down. We had to move my mom to St. Louis several years ago, so don't get down there as much as we used to for family business. But still, obviously, with the Cardinals minor league club down there, very close. We try to get down there 2 or 3 times a year to do some stories and stuff at the ballpark there. But yeah, that Steak and Shake is still there, absolutely.
So I got to give you a pass. You graduated from Kickapoo, and for some strange reason, you voluntarily went to Kansas. Said the Missouri Tiger fan.
Well, it was interesting. I could have gone either place, and I was accepted to both schools, to the journalism school. And actually, what the thing that triggered it was I had gone to a summer camp, a summer journalism camp in Lawrence in the summer in between my junior and senior years in high school, and really liked the place, really liked, got to meet some of the faculty members, and just kind of thought that was a better fit for me. It was a smaller school than Mizzou was, and the one thing I liked really about the school more than anything else was that the student newspaper was entirely student run. You know, the editor of the paper, the sports editor of the paper, all the jobs on the paper were all students, whereas at the Missourian and stuff, you know, the students were the reporters, but you still had the professors and stuff who were the editors of the paper. And I just, you know, I just thought it was a better fit for me, and I liked the opportunity more. I thought we'd have more of a chance to do more things. And then, you know, I had some good friends that went to Mizzou, obviously, growing up in the Springfield High School, that, you know, I never regretted my choice. I really enjoyed my time there. And Sally did go to Mizzou too, so we do have some spirited conversations sometimes about. Although our oldest son BJ went to KU, so I'm outnumbered 2-1. But yeah, you know, it's a great school, both good schools. I have nothing bad. I mean, I watch Mizzou football and root for them as well. But it's you know, now that we're going to play again in 2025, we'll see how that match goes.
So while you were at KU, talk to me about who Suzanne Shaw is.
She was my advisor, kind of my mentor. Yeah, she, you know, she was one of the people that I guess was in charge of that high school camp, and kind of then became an assistant dean of the school, and has since retired. But she was very instrumental in helping me and being a role model and a mentor for me during my career. Rick Musser was another guy who was the advisor to the student newspaper. I was ended up being the sports editor of the school newspaper, a 5-day-a-week newspaper that we had Monday through Friday on campus. And it just, you know, was a really fun, rewarding experience. But yeah, somebody that a teacher and advisor that really helped answer a lot of my my questions and suggestions, and told me what I was doing right and told me what I was doing wrong. Another guy named John Bremner was a great professor, editing professor as well. So as I say, I look back on my years at KU with nothing but fondness and nothing but happy memories. We had a great staff. A lot of those kids who worked on that newspaper gone on to be very successful and very prominent journalists over the years.
So we have something in common. We both worked for UPI.
Okay. Yeah. I actually started there when I was still in school. It just was timing-wise was really good. They had Kansas City Bureau. They decided when I was a senior at KU, just coincidentally timing-wise, to open a one-person bureau in Wichita. And they took a guy that had been working in the Kansas City Bureau and moved him to Wichita, so they had an opening in Kansas City. So I actually started working there a couple months before graduation as both a news reporter and as a kind of a backup sports writer, and was there for about a year and a half in Kansas City before the job opened up in St. Louis, and moved over here where I had more of an opportunity to still do some news, but you know, it wasn't a full-time sports writing position, but did more of the full-time sports stuff because we didn't have a designated sports writer like they did in Kansas City. Where did you work?
So I worked with Warren Mays and Les Carpenter. You know either of those two guys?
Warren's a very good friend. Yeah, knew Warren. Warren actually kind of took my job when I left St. Louis, when I left the UPI in St. Louis to go to the Globe Democrat.
So the best part about the UPI job, in addition to being able to eat for free when the Cardinals were in town, is at Mizzou, you were on the floor mid-court. Mm-hmm. I went to school there in the late 80s, 90s when they were in the top 5 almost continuously. So for a good 4-year run there, I'd be banging out my little UPI story, but I'd be center court on the Hearn Center floor watching Mizzou play basketball. It was great. It was a great game.
Yeah, I never take for granted that I'm at a ballpark or at a college basketball arena. Allen Fieldhouse is still the best place ever to watch a college basketball game. I never took that for granted, how much lucky I was to be there. And kind of always joke with people that, you know, some people wake up and say they have to go to work today, and I get to wake up and say I'm going to the ballpark. So
remember the old?
I've been very lucky.
Remember the old modem uploads?
Oh yeah, I've got some stories about that, which would take way too much of your time on this podcast to get into. But yeah, it's oh yeah, I still have a Trash 80 Radio Shack down in the basement that we used to use for back in the day.
To wrap up the UPI story, one of the things I remember, and vaguely, I forgot about it until I was thinking about, you know, sitting down with you. When I was at UPI, it was towards the end, and what would happen would be you'd go 2 months maybe without getting a check, but then you'd get, in retro, all the money they owed you a couple months later. So it really was kind of like pennies from heaven. You know, you'd be eating for free at Busch Stadium. You'd be making your money. I did a small thing with a couple radio stations in town, but then you'd get this fairly decent check from UPI, and they paid me. I heard of people who maybe didn't get everything they were owed, but I got paid everything I was owed.
Well, good for you. Yeah. No, I never had to, I never really, only time I strung for them was when I was in school. I was their campus correspondent at KU for those last couple of years. But that really wasn't a paying gig at the time. Once I got to work there full time, I never had any financial trouble with them. But it was a great place to work. A lot of great people, a lot of fond memories of getting to do doing a lot of fun stuff.
What'd you do in between UPI and the Globe?
Nothing.
Okay.
Stopped one day and went there the next. Yeah, no, yeah. So that was actually why I left UPI. I was to take the job at the Globe Democrat. I was the backup baseball and football writer. The football Cardinals were in town, and then did that for a little bit, and then moved transitioned straight into the full time baseball job, and had unfortunately, the Globe went out of business in 1986, and I tell people we beat the trend. We folded before it became popular for newspapers to go out of business. But, it opened a lot of doors and did a lot of things, book writing and national writing that I probably never would have done. But, I honestly believe that had the Globe not gone out of business, I would still be there working there today. The only thing I ever wanted to do was be a baseball beat writer, and the Cardinals were always my favorite team. So I got my dream job when I was 26 years old, and it was kind of tough when it disappeared a couple of years later.
Do you have a good Bob Burns story?
He was a great guy. I mean, he was a very, very supportive, very encouraging. I mean, I got to the Globe kind of when he was just, basically, moving into retirement, but I'd known him obviously during the Globe days. But yeah, he was just a throwback guy, a consummate reporter, a consummate journalist. And, he and Bob Brigg both kind of were links to a different era and links to a different style of reporting, different style of, being involved in the business. But one of my stories in the Globe wasn't Bob. It was when the Cardinals were particularly struggling. I just happened to be in the office one day, and the publisher John Prentice walked by my desk, and he looked at me and said, "I'm sorry, but we're going to have to make a change." And I'm like, "What are you talking about?" And he goes, "Well, the first thing you do when things aren't going right is you kill the messenger." So he was obviously kidding, but yeah. So it was a good fun run, and as I say, I had there were some financial challenges from working there because the things weren't going right. There's a long history of things that happened a long time ago that we don't need to get into. But as far as why the paper had to go out of business from a financial standpoint, but we were very proud of the job we did. We, kind of consider ourselves the underdog in town, but held our own in breaking stories with a smaller staff, an aggressive staff, and lucky enough to work with a lot of people that I really, really had good friendships with.
So the Globe closes in '86. I'm not really old enough to remember all the political stuff behind the scenes, but
Right.
The same company that ran the Post-Dispatch ran the Globe, and it sounds
They had a JOA. They had a joint operating agreement, and what happened, which came as a result of a strike. Newhouse was the one that owned the Globe, and they had a strike in the 1950s, and after that strike, they basically just to kind of tell a short version of the story was that the agreement was that the Post would be the afternoon paper, the Globe would be the morning paper, and they shared the same printing presses. So the Post owned the printing presses. Well, at the middle of the 1980s, the Post decided to break the JOA and become a morning newspaper. Well, so since they owned the presses, obviously, they were printing their paper at the same time that the Globe needed to have a press run. So the Globe had to contract out. So they didn't own the presses. They had to contract out to get the paper printed, and that because they didn't own the presses, that meant they didn't have any ability to make money printing, magazines or newsletters or whatever on odd hours that they didn't need the presses to print the newspapers and had to pay that expense. So that was the basic financial reason that started the Globe's demise was when the Post broke the JOA and went to a morning paper, then that just cost them a lot of money.
Had Dan O'Neill on a previous episode, and I just miss the old newspaper buildings. You just don't see buildings like that anymore.
No, it was a different era. Actually, Sal and I were talking about this earlier today about how the journalism business has changed over the years. You got internet stuff now. You got this Zoom podcast that we're doing. You've got, sports radio talk stations that you didn't used to have. You got, that just everything is, Twitter, everything is different about the business. And, the newspapers are still obviously very important and still a very important part of that, the media business, but their role has changed because of the competition and because it's the way people get their news nowadays.
One of the things that people they understand it, but they don't really get it is what a deadline used to be.
Oh yeah, that's one of the things about the internet is you don't have those pressing deadlines. Yeah, you had a certain time you had to have your story in, and you had to have it, in at the right time, or the paper was late, and then that cost people money, and you heard about it. So yeah, it was definitely a deadline driven business, and when you're a sports writer, especially, you're used to having to get stuff done quickly and get it out. And that was one of the things I think my UPI training really was important to me because I learned to write very fast, and learned to 20 minutes to write an 800-word story was not an impossibility, as long as you were, cranking it up and getting it ready to go. So I enjoy kind of rush a little bit. Yeah. I like to take my time and write stories, now that you're not under that deadline pressure, but I never had a problem with that.
Did you think the St. Louis Sun ever had a chance?
Oh, well, actually, we're cleaning out the basement. I just actually found a couple copies of the St. Louis Sun sitting in the basement. I think they had two things that were working against them. I think they're a little bit ahead of their time in terms of thinking they could build a business without having home delivery of the newspaper. Obviously, the two greatest costs in the newspaper business, the printed newspaper or division, kind of part of the business is the cost of the newsprint and production of the paper, and then the distribution cost. So they tried to eliminate the distribution cost by really trying to get people to buy it, at newsstands and things. And St. Louis is just not that much of a commuter kind of town like New York or Chicago or DC or someplace like that, where you could do that, where you could put papers outside the subway station or the metro station and sell a lot of newspapers. So I think they missed the boat on that regard. And I think they also probably erred in not being able to hire enough St. Louis people. St. Louis is a very provincial market. You don't kind of takes a while for people coming in from the outside point of view to people in St. Louis to kind of accept you and figure out, that you can be part of the community, at least my opinion. So I think if they'd hired, maybe a few more local people that had already had an audience and already had people knowing in St. Louis who they were, I think they might have had a little bit better chance to survive. I wasn't involved. I didn't work there, so I don't know really what all the other ins and outs of the paper were. But unfortunately, what happened was when they didn't make it and they went out of business, it basically put an end to any other entity kind of deciding to come in and try to change the post and start up another newspaper.
So before you start at USA Today, have you begun writing your books yet, or are most of the books after you get to USA Today?
The first book that I did was the book, Ozzie Smith book, which came out in '88. So it was a couple of years before the USA Today thing started. I was actually a correspondent for USA Today in St. Louis, and that's kind of how that door opened to go there to when they started Baseball Weekly. But the book writing was kind of coming along just at that same time. I was doing just a bunch of freelance things at that point after the Globe closed. The Ozzie book was one of them. Did a lot of work for the Sporting News, which was based here in St. Louis at the time, and did some radio shows and did some kind of syndicated notes column that I sent out to a lot of other newspapers in Missouri and Illinois. So just kind of a lot of things like that to keep my hand in the business and stay busy and stay around the ballpark. But the book writing kind of was starting just about the same time.
How does it make you feel to think that pretty much every home in St. Louis has one book of yours or another?
Well, that's pretty good. I mean, I would like to see that. Yeah, that's a real nice honor. As I say, I've been very lucky, very, very privileged to be in the right position at the right time for some of those things to come my way. And it's fun. I enjoy it, and I enjoy the finished product. I enjoy the production of working on the book, and have had the opportunity to work with a lot of great people, and luckily the books have been well received, and it's I can't say anything. It seems like it's been a long career, but it also seems like it's gone by very fast. So.
More than 30 books published. Any idea how many sold? Ballpark?
Not really. I know that the two that probably sold the best were the Jack Buck autobiography and the biography of Art McGuire, Home Run Hero, which came out the year that he broke the home run record. It actually got translated into Chinese and Japanese, which is literally one of the times that I look at the book and I say I have no idea what I wrote here because it's all in Chinese and Japanese. But those books, and the Buck book was my favorite by all means because we got to spend so much time together while we worked on the book. And but yeah, they both. The McGuire book actually reached the New York Times bestseller list, but the other ones, every book has been different. Every book has been fun, but no, I don't know. I'd have to see if I can figure that out. It's an interesting question.
So the book, the Buck book, it's called That's a Winner, right?
Yes.
And how do you go about crafting a book like that? Because if I remember, and I've read it a couple times, more than anything else, it's a baseball book, but it's also like a period piece when he
I mean, I
talks
think
about Jack
that's,
Corona.
yeah, that's one of the things that surprises people a little bit about the book, I think, is that it does talk about, him growing up in the Depression. It talks about World War II, talks about the Civil Rights Movement. I mean, he gives his opinion about a lot of the contemporary issues of that period of his life, but it obviously does end up being primarily about baseball. But it was funny, is I had asked him one time about doing the book, and he told me he didn't want to do it. He wasn't interested in doing a book. And we had one conversation. I remember distinctly, I was at home in Washington when I was working for Baseball Week, and talked to him on the phone. And I said, look, I'm never going to ask you again, but you know that whenever you decide that you do want to do a book, I'd love to write it. And he said, okay. And so literally didn't see him or talk to him probably for 6 months, a year, I don't know, something like that. It happened to be in St. Louis for opening day the next year at the ballpark. And when I got to the ballpark, the first person I ran into that day was Jack Buck. The first thing he said to me was, so when are we going to do that book? So that's kind of how it happened. Now, Jack, interestingly, I was supposed to, you talk about timing and things, happening for a reason. Before I took the job at Baseball Weekly, I actually was set to go to work for Jack at CBS Sports. He was going to be the number 2 announcer on the game of the week and do, one of the playoff games or something like that. And so Jack had arranged to have CBS hire me to basically be his notes person. I was going to travel with him to all the games, just kind of feed him information to use on the air and the broadcast and things like that. So wherever the games were, and then do the playoffs and all that kind of stuff. So then that was, basically a done deal. And then just before that was about to begin, Brett Musburger, if you remember, gets fired by CBS, and they elevate Jack to be the number 1 announcer. So I remember talking to Jack that night after it happened. He was in New York. We talked on the phone. He said, as far as I know, our deal's the same. So I'm even more excited now, because now we're going to be doing the top game of the week. Now we're doing the All-Star game. Now we're doing playoffs all the way through the World Series. And then, lo and behold, finds out that he's going to be working with Tim McCarver. And the network had already promised McCarver his guy to be the notes guy for the number 1 team. So that basically took my opportunity to do that away. And they were kind enough. They still said, hey, you were going to do the number 2 team. We'll still let you, be the guy to do that. And I said, no, the only reason I was going to do it was to work with Jack. And so then shortly after that's when the whole, USA Today thing came about. So that, let's say the Globe thing, going out of business opened one door, the thing not working out with Jack opened up another door. So, just go with the flow. And usually if you have faith in God and have faith in yourself and your ability, things are going to work out.
So I'm a huge fan of Baseball Weekly at the time, early 90s, 91, I think. 1991, exactly. Not a bad year to have a baseball-only magazine debut.
Yeah, it was fun. I tell people that first year and a half that I worked there was the best job I ever had, even as much as I love covering the Cardinals on a day-to-day basis, because we had no budget and we had nobody who knew what we needed to spend or what we needed to do, because it was a new publication, and we had the backing of the publishers of USA Today, who were huge baseball fans, Tom and John Curley, and Dennis Farrell was there at the time too. And so they were letting us basically do whatever we wanted. So I would go into the office and say, hey, I want to go to California for a week and do these couple of stories. Okay, go ahead. So it was totally free reign to do whatever we wanted to do. And it was a lot of fun. We did a lot of good stuff there. I was proud of the years that I spent working there, covering the National League. Got to go and do a lot of fun things. You obviously do all the key games, all the playoff games, all the World Series games, and winter meetings. And yeah, it was really, really a fun opportunity. And of course, like every other job, it kind of changed over the years when different bosses come in and budgets come into play, and some people leave and some people have different ideas about what they want you to do. And so it unfortunately kind of faded away after a period of years, and I went on to do something else. But it those first couple of years there, it was a tremendous job.
Ballpark, how many World Series have you covered?
I was asked that the other day. I'd have to go through and add them. The first one I covered was in 1980 when I was still at UPI. The Royals made the World Series. So even though I was in St. Louis at the time, had been in Kansas City, so they brought me back over to help be on our team to cover the World Series. And then obviously the 3 the Cardinals were involved in. I think I counted up the games one time. It's about 58 or 59 World Series games that I covered in person. I think it's about 15 or so World Series. I'd have to go back and add them up. I'm not sure. I don't, still now I don't go every year. If the Cardinals aren't playing, I really don't go. So it's the role, my role has changed, over the years, but it's always fun to be there. It's an exciting time.
So you've got the two boys, correct?
Correct. They're both grown-ups now. BJ is living in Boise, Idaho. He's actually a 3-time Idaho Sports Writer of the Year for the Idaho Press. He covers Boise State athletics for the paper there and does a great job. And my younger son, Mike, had spent a long time working at Rawlings Sports as their director of social media and just changed jobs here about a year or so ago to being running the operations manager now for Adam Wainwright's charity Big League Impact. So they live here in town, both doing a great job. BJ is married to Karen, got two grandsons, live out in Boise, Idaho, and Mike and Lori just got married here in St. Louis last year. So very, very lucky from a family aspect of our life too.
Is the grandparent thing as much fun as they say?
Except for the fact that Boise, Idaho is a long ways away from St. Louis, and that we don't get to see them as often as we did. We actually, our five-year-old grandson is named Naismith, and we actually had him with us in spring training this year for the whole time. His mom was recovering from some surgery, so it was easier on her if they only had one of the kids to deal with. So we took, Naismith down with us to the spring training, and that was a lot of fun.
How tricky was travel on the young kids at home?
It was tricky. The re-entry period, as my wife liked to call it, was the trickier part because I'd come back off a trip and want to do undo everything she had done as far as getting them to school, bed on time and eating and stuff like that. And I was just trying to be nice to them and spoil them. So, I tried to maximize my trips to be there as much as I could for stuff and not be gone, when they really need it. Luckily, they were able to come home. When we lived in Washington, D.C., they were able to come back to St. Louis and stay with my in-laws, had a swimming pool in the backyard. So they spent the summers here mostly with her parents. So that made it easier to be gone at some of the times. But it's, it was, and I tried, and they accompanied, her, Sally and the kids went with me a lot of times on trips too. So that made it good. What
is the Freedom Forum grant? And take your time explaining to me how you applied, how you got it, how that whole thing works, because I know about what it is, but I've never met anybody who actually won it.
Well, it's another kind of strange story about timing and how it works out. During the strike in 1994, Suzanne Shaw, another reference to Suzanne Shaw, had always been after me to come back to KU and be a guest instructor in some of the classes for a couple of days. So I called her and I said, hey, because the strike going on, I probably can work this out. So we set it up for me to go back to KU to be there for a couple of days, just talking with kids and visiting with classes and stuff. And while I was there, she turns out that was on this committee with Doug Anderson, who was the dean of the journalism school at Arizona State at the time. They went on to Penn State a few years later, now retired. But Doug had applied and gotten this grant from the Freedom Forum to hire a person to come in and teach sports writing for a year at Arizona State to be a visiting, professional in residence kind of job. So Suzanne just asked me, said, hey, if you know anybody in the business that you think would be a candidate to do this, would like to do it, they're looking for people. And so I said, okay. So I remember talking to Sally about it that night on the phone. I said, I think that might be something kind of fun to do, go out and live in Arizona for a year. Okay. So I told Suzanne, I thought, the next day I said, when I was back on campus at KU, I said, I think I would really kind of like to do, I might be interested in that. And she said, okay. And so about a week later, I'm back in the office in DC, and the phone rings, and it's Doug Anderson, who is the dean of the J School at Arizona State, saying, we'd like you to come out for an interview for the job. I said, okay. And so we set it up and, when I was going to go and all that kind of stuff. And so I was going to go with me. And then before I hung up the phone, I just said, so just out of curiosity, how many people and what's the situation, timeline, all that kind of stuff. And his direct quote was, well, we're pretty much hoping you're it. So I said, well, this is my job to screw up and lose here more than anything else. So flew out there and spent a couple of days visiting with him and touring the campus, and they offered me the job. So 1994, summer of 94, we moved out to got an apartment in Scottsdale and moved out there for a year to teach at Arizona State. It's a fun year.
Journalism major from Mizzou. My class was the first class that actually had computers. So we had to do old school and new school at the same time. When you're teaching journalism, I'm going to assume the first thing you're stressing is the importance of having the truth in front of you. But I mean, what are you trying to teach young minds about, in 1994 anyway,
Yeah.
about being a
Yeah.
good journalist?
Well, I think your integrity, number one. Don't sell yourself out for a story. Don't be professional about your job. Don't develop. I always tell people, don't develop too close of friendships that you can't be objective. You got to keep your objectivity. You have to be responsible in what you do, be professional in what you do, and just have a knowledge of the sport that you're covering. But don't be afraid to ask questions. Don't be afraid to let people explain something to you if you don't understand it. Just earn your you realize that you're going to have to earn your stripes. Nothing's going to be handed to you. It's going to be hard work. You're going to have to work on weekends. You're going to have to work at nights. You're going to have to work long days. And realize that this is that you're lucky to have this job, and don't take it lightly, and don't try to shortchange it and skimp, and don't cheat on your expense reports. Don't just kind of use common sense and do a good job. I mean, I don't remember any specific here's my do's and don'ts kind of advice that I gave them. It was just more of a leading by example, I guess. And if situations came up, then we talked through it and figured out what they should do.
Were you one of those guys that all the president's men had a big effect on?
I mean, I've got the book downstairs in the basement. Yeah, I guess I was enough into the business already at that point that, kind of knew that that's what I wanted to do, and not necessarily from a news standpoint of, being a news reporter or, investigative reporter or something like that. I like being over there in the toy and game department, going to ballparks and writing about baseball games.
What were some of the baseball writers that you wanted to emulate? Were there any?
I mean, my competition at the Post at the time that I was at the Globe was Rick Hummel. I mean, it was Rick and I were the two beat writers that were on the road all the time together and competed. It was a friendly competition. We definitely didn't trade sources. We definitely didn't trade content, but we were able to share a cab to the ballpark, or share a cab to the airport, or grab lunch, or something like that. Go out for a bite to eat after the game was over. So we were friends, still friends to this day, but we had a good, I think, professional relationship and a good respect for each other and our abilities as a writer. Developed a lot of friends in the business. I don't know that there was anybody that I really specifically looked up to as a writer as a kid growing up. I just read everything that I could about the job, and about seeing how you kind of did it. But luckily, as I got into the business, made a lot of friends who are still friends 30 years later.
Getting ready to wrap it up with Rob Rains. Want to thank him for his time. We're going to do a version of St. Louis 7 afterwards. A couple quick questions. Everybody that's ever been elected into the Missouri Hall of Fame, I always ask them, what was that like?
It was a great honor. Yeah, it was the Missouri Sports Hall of Fame, a big dinner down in Springfield, and luckily kind enough for them to include me, I guess, basically for the books and the long years of being in the business. But they did some interviews, Ozzy and Whitey and stuff, were kind enough to do a little video when as part of the presentation and the introduction was concerned. So yeah, it was a very, very neat honor, and I was very appreciative of it. It was a fun event.
You've done books with McGuire and Ozzy and LaRussa. What was he like to do a book with? On the surface, he's kind of one of those not easy to get to know kind of a person, but when you're writing a book, I'm thinking he undid a couple layers of the onion for you.
Well, what was interesting about that was I told him that I wanted specifically, most of the books that I've done have either been autobiographies that were actually, just done with the person officially and they're written in their voice, or authorized biographies that tells their side of the story. But I specifically told Tony that I wanted that book to be an unauthorized biography, because there were two sides. There was obviously, in his years, over the years, the people that he didn't get along with, there were two sides to a lot of stories. So I wanted to be able to tell both sides of the stories and just kind of be an objective reporter covering everything. And he basically didn't want me to do the book. And he told me that, the reason was he was trying to get less publicity, not more, at the time. And so, but he said, send me a list of the people you want to talk to. And so I did. And, I know that there were people that I talked to for that book, interviewed people in that book, that would not have talked to me had he not said it was okay to talk to me. Two in particular were his sister and Jerry Reinsdorf, the owner of the White Sox. And so they both were very kind and did interviews. We had a great side. I went to Florida and had a great dinner with his sister and her husband, and then did a long interview with Reinsdorf in Chicago. And I know had Tony not told them it was okay to talk to me, that they would not have done so. So at the end of that season, he basically called me and said, "How's the book coming along?" And I told him, and so it was going fine. And I sent him the things. I actually interviewed him for the book, just used other material. But at the end of the process, he reviewed it and only asked me to make one really minor change, which I agreed to make. And then he told me after it was all said and done, he said, "You did a hell of a job." And then he ended up buying some of them as a giveaway presents at our foundation dinner and stuff. So I know he was okay with it when it finally came out. So.
How do you write a book where you want to give a complete picture, but you don't want to stress the negative or the less perfect stuff? You want to include it because you got to tell a story. But how do you deal with giving enough where you've touched on the subject, but you don't need to elaborate much more on it?
I think it's just a common sense decision, as kind of be a self-editor and just decide how much of something you wanted to put in there. And as I say, it's different it depends on the style of book. As I say, the LaRusso book was different than, say, the Jack Buck book or the Ozzie Smith book or whatever, which were officially autobiographies. So it was by them with me. I was just the kind of the co-writer, the ghostwriter, if you will. So there were probably things in both of those books that had I been doing it, third person, I might not have used it or written it the way that they told the story, but it was their book. So I didn't, wasn't able to use, my influence there to change their minds on how they wanted to write it. So that was okay with me. I didn't have a problem with that, but I think it's just a matter of, just evaluating every story and everything that you want to put in the book and just, weighing it on its own merits and trying not to go too crazy one way or the other.
So in a perfect world, for a man that has accomplished as much as you have, you got a pet project, something you really want to get done before you hang it up?
Not really. I mean, the one different book that I wrote one novel. I wrote a book with Andy Van Slyke a few years ago called The Curse, and it was an idea that he had about the Cubs, which was before they won the World Series, and it's out there. It's a plane crash that happens that affects the team and how they recover. And it turns out it's a mystery book. Turns out that the cause of the accident was because the plane crash was not an accident. So that was a lot of fun. So I suppose maybe at some point I would like to get back and write another novel. I don't know. I've got some ideas, but when you do as much stuff as I do on a day-to-day kind of basis, to being able to devote that much time to research and to the writing process that you'd have to put into a novel, don't really have time to do it right now, but maybe someday, you never know.
Well, not the world's best situation, but thanks for making the time. Hope you had yourself a good time.
Absolutely. I appreciate you asking. Thank you.
Take care.
Thank you.